Hello everyone, welcome back to another augmented reality tutorial, and today's class we are going to talk about how we can manage the data inside our AR application so that we can dynamically add more component such as new furniture and new any kind of game objects in the project, right? So currently what we have is that we have a game object which is containing the data handler. Actually, I'm going to call it the data manager. So this data handler script is basically holding the furniture prefab, which is basically get replaced when we click on of the button, right? Now the problem with this approach is that, say we want to add a new furniture, right? So what are the steps? First of all, we need that prefab. Then we need to go to the button. We need to um, each time we need to create a new button, and we also need to add a prefab corresponding to that button, right? So this process is really time consuming. We have to put a lot of effort. We have to change a lot of places to make sure that our app is working. So to get rid of this problem, we are going to make it so that the buttons here is automatically added when you create a new object, or when you basically add a new object into your project. Okay, to do that, in this class we are going to use the resource manager. We're going to use the resources folder that comes up with Unity. But in the next tutorial we're going to see that how we can do the same thing but with addressables. That will help us to host our assets or the 3D models inside a cloud service such as Google Cloud, right? So without further ado, let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do now is to change this data manager class a little bit. So go ahead into your data handler class, and we're going to do a few changes here so that we can load this data automatically from the resource folder. Okay, so the plan here is that we are going to create a button manager that is going to hold all the information for our button, right? And I think we have some sort of button manager already, right? So what we can do here is that we are going to create a, I'm just going to comment this out for a while, and we're going to create a new button manager in here. So we can do private button manager and button manager, and we can make it a serialized field so we can see it from the Unity editor. Awesome. The next thing we need is to create a game object that is going to hold all the button object, right? So this is going to be a game object. So this is going to be the container inside our scroll manager, or the scroller. So we're going to create a reference for that button container, right? So we have a button manager that is going to hold all the information for each of the buttons, right? And we also have a container which is going to contain those buttons, right? And next we are going to create a method here that is going to be responsible for creating the buttons dynamically based on the items that we have. Now I said item, right? So we need some items. The best approach here that I can think about is to keep all the items in a scriptable objects. If you don't know what a scriptable object is, don't worry much about it for now. Think about it as a storage, right? So it's kind of a class which can store your data, but they does not destroy in the play mode, right? So a prefab, if you change the value inside a prefab in a play mode, that means when you are playing the game inside Unity, something like this. So if I play the game, and in that time if I try to say change the value of this input manager, for example, if I make it just for example 30, right? Now if I go back, you see that rotation value has got changed back to 0. So scriptable objects make sure that your data is persistent, right? So we are going to use a scriptable object to hold all the information of an item. The information can be the 3D model associated with the item. It can be the name of the item. It can be the price of the item, and so on, right? So we can just create a scriptable object just like we create a script. So I'm going to create a new C# script and I'm going to call it item, and inside here, inside the item, we are going to make it we're just going to change the mono behavior with scriptable objects, right? So it basically inherit from scriptable objects. So now this is a scriptable objects automatically. By default, Unity gives you mono behavior, but if you extend it from scriptable object, then it becomes an scriptable object. And we can create a custom menu here. I'll show you what it does. We can do create asset menu, and we can just put file name. This is going to be just the name of the item by default, so I'm just going to do it item1, right? And then we can put a menu name here. The menu name should be add item and then slash item. Okay, so if we do this, I'm just going to save this. We don't need this start and update method. We can go back to Unity, and now if I right click here and go to create, we will see there should be one item, but I cannot see it. Just 1 second. I think there is some error. Okay, we're going to comment this for now, and this one as well. Yeah, this is showing the errors because our data handler does not have any furniture anymore, right? Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to save this and now go back to Unity, create add item, right? So you can see that if I now create this item, I'm just going, it already gives a name item1, right? I can add multiple items, and these are all the scriptable objects. These are basically saved as asset. So just like you add a new model or new image or new script inside your project, it's just like that. It's a new object, right? That is inside your file explorer. It's not inside the project yet, but it's inside the file explorer, right? So it's not inside the hierarchy yet. So yeah, so it basically always persists your data. It does not get deleted no matter if you play the game and come back or not, right? So yeah, so we can just check the property by adding a few variables here. I can just add a new variable called price. Then we can have something called maybe we should have a prefab, right? So item prefab, this is going to hold the 3D model, and we also need a sprite which is going to responsible for like designing the button, right? So when we design a button, we should put a sprite for the image item, and we will also add a price tag in there. Okay, so item image, that's good. Let's go back to Unity and check if it worked. Yes, it worked. So you see now we have a scriptable object which has a price, game object, and sprite. Now what is the significance? Why do we need it? The really exciting thing about this is that we can use this just like a prefab, right? So the item 1 now holds all the information. For example, for table, the table price is 1100. Sorry, we can put a table prefab here, and then we can put a sprite here. I don't have any sprite, so I'm just going to keep something like this. So now we have this whole object that is basically a table, right? No, sofa. So it's a sofa, so we can do sofa, right? And we can create multiple object like that. We can create another object that can be table, right? And maybe the price of the table is $50, and then we can add the table here. Although it's rotated, we can use this one. We can add the sprite. Again, I don't have any sprite. You can actually just grab one from internet just to show you how it's done. Table png. Okay. So I am grabbing this from Pixel Squid. I'm just going to save the image in my desktop, drag and drop it here inside my asset folder. Because this is a 3D project, when I started this was a 3D project, we need to make sure that the structure type is basically 2D, otherwise I cannot use it as a sprite. Alright, yeah, so now we can basically drag and drop the table here, right? So now we have two items, sofa, table. We can add a lot of them, and this is all we need to do when we need to create a new asset inside our project, right? You'll see. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is like put this inside the resource folder, because that is where we are going to load them all from. So I'm going to call it as a item and drag everything in there. Awesome. Yep, so now let's head back to our data handler, and in here we are going to create a new variable. We're going to create a new variable which is going to store all the items. So I'm just going to put a serialized field here as well, private list of item. Now you see the item is already found here because we have the scriptable object item, right? So we can do list of item and items, right? Okay, now inside our create button we can do for each. So we can run a for each loop, and we can run through all the items inside this item list, right? So for item I in items. So for each of the items we are going to first of all create a button. We're going to create a button manager b equal new button manager. Oops, not this. We have to actually instantiate it, right? So we're going to instantiate, and we're going to pass the button prefab, which we have not created yet. So let's create a button prefab here. Actually, we can just change this as a button prefab. It's the same thing, right? Because we are basically going to create a game object that holds the button manager, so we can actually instantiate that directly. We don't need to have a game object for that. So it's going to be button prefab, and then we're going to add the parent as the button container dot transform, right? So the button container dot transform is going to be the actual transform or the container that holds all the button, which is basically this guy, this content guy, right? So this holds all the buttons. So this is going to be the button container. Okay, anyways, next we are going to basically need to have something like a unique ID, right? So if we put an ID in here, we can somehow grab those ID and track that which button was selected, right? So I'm going to create a new ID here. Again, this data structure can change in the next tutorial, but for now we think this is okay to start, right? So this is going to be kind of a two-part video. We're not going to finish everything by today, but this is going to be a good start. All right, and then here we can do button dot, and then again, like I said, for each of the button it should have a ID. The unique ID is going to determine which particular object is currently selected. So let's go back to button manager, then we're going to come back here again, go to button manager. Oops. Yep. In the button manager we need to have a new ID. So I'm just going to do pub private int item ID, and we are also going to create a sprite for our button. Okay, next I'm just going to make this encapsulated. So basically we can only set the item, right? Although to be honest, like you could do it, you don't have to do it in this way. You could make it public. That will also work because we are already giving the setting permission, but I'm just going to do it in this way. Okay, and in here we're just going to set the item ID with the value, right? So whenever we do button manager dot item ID equals something, this value is going to get changed. Okay, what is wrong here? Okay, maybe my project is not supported with C#7, so we can do set, right? We can do set here, and we can say item ID is equal value, right? Okay, so what next? We are also going to do the same thing for the texture. We are going to do a button, public sprite. Actually, if you right click on here, I'm just going to delete this. There's a shortcut. If you right click on here, go to refactor. I'm not sure if you're using JetBrains Rider, but there should be similar kind of option in your editor as well. If you're using Visual Studio, you're also going to find this kind of similar kind of option, right? I'm going to refactor this, and I want to actually encapsulate it. Refactor encapsulate the field, and next set. Right, so it creates the setter and getter for me, and I can just complete the method. Okay, so the button texture is going to be just like the, sorry, got messed up. Right, yeah, so it should be the same. So we're going to do button texture is going to be equal to value. We're also going to do we're also going to add a reference to the buttons image, right? So these two things are different. So a image contains the sprite, right? And we get this sprite from the scriptable object, right? So this is going to be the sprite of that image, and we are going to apply that image into our raw image inside the UI, right? So one thing is sprite, which is going to be the actual image, and raw image is basically the script or the object that is going to contain the sprite. If you are not like clear about the concept, you'll see that in a while. Don't worry about it. So raw image and then button image. Okay, so here we can do button image dot texture is equal button texture dot texture. Okay, all right. So we have the item ID, which is getting set here. Everything is set up, everything is good. Yep, so now we can basically go here where we are doing the select object. Before we were doing something like this, right? But now we are going to change the ID. So we are going to create a set furniture, set furniture, and we're going to pass the item ID, right? Now whenever you select an object, we are going to pass that ID to our data handler, and we are going to calculate from there that which object should be selected or spawned. Okay, so let's go back to data handler. We are first of all we were doing this. Let's complete this. The item ID should be the ID, the current ID, right? So this is going to be the current ID. Actually, maybe do current ID. Okay, and we are going to have a new method that is going to be the set furniture method. Set furniture. Oops. Okay, I'm just going to make sure that this is correct. Yep, this is correct. And in here we are going to pass an ID. Now just to keep stuff simple, I'm going to assume that the ID is basically the like the index of this item in this list, right? So if the item is in the first component in the list, that means the ID of the item is 0. If the item is the second one in the list, the ID of the item is 1, and so on. So that is why we are not going to make stuff complicated. We are going to say, we're going to actually uncomment this furniture. We need this. We're going to do, the furniture is going to be now item, sorry, items of ID dot item prefab, right? So we are going to change this dynamically based on this ID that is clicked by the user. Now why do we need to worry about this ID? Why not do it the previous way we have been doing? Well, in that case, you remember that I talked about that in the start of this video, that every time we needed to assign this variable, this furniture. So no matter how many times you create a new button, you are going to have to create a new prefab and assign that prefab to each of these buttons, right? It can be error prone, because when you have thousands of data, when you have 1,000 buttons, it's really hard to manage them one by one, right? So we need to make it dynamic. That is why we are not using this. So we can basically remove that from our button manager. I think we also need to go to input manager and make sure we have this line uncommented. I commented it out in the beginning of the video because it was showing some error. Okay, all right, and yeah, let's complete this. We are going to do b dot button texture is equal I dot item image, and we're going to do ID plus plus. actually current ID, right? So current ID plus plus. Okay, so each time you add a new component, you are basically going to add a new ID to that component. Okay, all right. Also, I think rather than making it public, just make it private. We are also only going to give the access to read the furniture, right? So we can just do um, public game object get furniture, and then we can just return the furniture. Okay, so yeah, let's now go to the input manager, and rather than doing it in this way, you can do get furniture, right? All right, so now let's see what have we done. Let's go back to Unity and check that there is no error. Good. The data manager now have two new fields. One is a prefab that is looking for, which is going to be a button manager, and another one is a container. So let's first of all drag and drop the container, and the items are all zero. If I play the game, you'll see the items are still zero. They're not adding automatically. So let's do that, and then we will be done. So to do that, we are going to first of all create a new method. Just in here, load maybe items, load items. That's a good name. And in here, we are going to load all the items from our resource folder. So resources dot load all. We're not going to use it finally, but just for now we are using it. But I'll talk about the problems that you can face with resources. And like I said, if we are planning to make it a production ready application, we need to have the ability to upload content from cloud, right? So we actually have to learn addressables to figure that out. So for now, this is good. You will have some idea, and this is really simple to do. So you will have some idea that how we can make it dynamic. Then in the next tutorial, I'll show you how to actually do it, right? So anyways, right, so here we can just do for each var item in maybe to item object, and in here we are going to do items dot add item, and we need to cast this, so we can do as item, right? So you can cast it in two ways. Either you can use the as keyword, right, like I did here, or you could do something like this. You could do item, right? Both of them are correct, so I prefer this one. Okay, so now save this, and we need to call these methods inside the start, right? So just create a new method called start, and we're going to do load items, and we're also going to do create button, maybe call it buttons. Okay, okay. Now save this. Let's go back to Unity, and in here we are going to make a button prefab, right? So for now I am just going to use this as a button prefab, but obviously we should add more component into this in the next tutorial, because it's almost half an hour long, this tutorial. So I'm not going to do that in this part, but we can do it in the next part. Okay, so yeah, so let's create a new prefab here. I'm just going to drag and drop this, and I'm going to call it as a one button, right? And we don't need any of this now. We can delete them. In here I am going to drag and drop the button, You'll see there should be some error, but don't worry about that. All of them should go away as we move on. But as you can see, we have one button now in here. The other one is not spawning because I think for the error happened, so it's kind of broke in the middle. Yeah, you see there is a null reference exception for the button set button textures, so that is why the second button could not be loaded, right? But if we fix that, let's actually fix that, and it will be all fixed. So I'm just going to go back to my button manager, and in here we need to make this as a serialized field, so I can assign this. Right, so let's go back to Unity now, and when we have a button, it also has a raw image. Obviously it's not going to work like this now, but like for now it's going to work like this, but we're going to change this to look more professional. Yeah, so let's see. Yep, now you can see that we have two buttons, right? We also have the textures of the buttons. This is pretty awesome, right? So we can now have lots of other components. We can have thousands of components. All we need to do is this: we need to create an item, add item, right? And maybe this is going to be chair, okay? And then we can add a price, we can add a prefab, we can add a sprite, right? That's it. That's all you have to do. If I now play the game, you'll see that the new component is getting added automatically. We don't have to do anything else, right? So yeah, so I'll show you how we can make it look more professional, because now it looks really sketchy. So we're going to make it look a little bit good in the next class, and also show you how we can use the cloud services like Google Cloud to host our 3D models, right? So all these components, if we can host them from internet, we don't have to even come to Unity editor, right? We can just host those inside cloud, and everything is going to be automatically synced in our application. That would be awesome. Okay guys, so that's all about it today, and I'll see you next week. Bye.